For today's video, I want to go over some plants that I think are worth keeping in your cherry shrimp tanks. So let's start with the more obvious one, moss. Java moss is the most popular option in the hobby because it's cheap and very easy to find in shops, but there's plenty of other moss types out there. Personally, I prefer the look of Christmas moss and Taiwan moss, so I usually use that, and I've used them in a wide range of setups, but I do think Taiwan moss is easier to keep than Christmas moss. The main benefit of adding moss to a shrimp tank is the large amount of surface area that it can provide to allow biofilm and algae to grow, which will be a major food source for your shrimp. As the moss grows and thickens out, it also provides plenty of hiding spots for tiny little baby shrimp, helping them to avoid becoming a snack for the fish in the tank. Since moss is an epiphyte plant, you attach it to hardscape such as driftwood or rocks as part of an aquascape, and there's no need to plant it in the tank substrate. This makes moss very easy to keep, and I've literally seen people throw a fistful of moss into their aquarium and just let it grow, and the cherry shrimp will interact with it and graze on it constantly. Next up we have floating plants, which are an excellent option for shrimp tanks. I've kept various types including duckweed, red root floaters, salvinia, Amazon frogbit and water lettuce, and they've all delivered excellent results. One of the main advantages of adding floating plants to your shrimp tank is their ability to access CO2 directly from the air. This lets them grow at a far faster pace than submerged plants and use up a lot more of the harmful nitrogen compounds in the water to keep your shrimp safe. Floating plants also provide extra surface area for biofilm growth in the tank, giving your shrimp more places to graze and feed. I'm a huge fan of salvinia, but I have been trying out water lettuce in a lot of my tanks recently, but in reality I honestly think all floating plants will work well. Next up we have pearlweed, and I do have mixed feelings about this one. Personally, I think it's just too high maintenance for a normal planted tank due to its ability to quickly take over and dominate all of the other plants. On the flip side of this though, I think it's absolutely perfect for a single plant tank like this one, where you just let the pearlweed grow out and essentially become a jungle. If you are aiming for a Wallstad style or other type of filterless shrimp tank, then pearlweed is an excellent choice. I started this pearlweed jungle shrimp tank with a single pot of pearlweed, and it quickly filled the available space, making this setup very budget friendly. A lot of plant nurseries do market this as an advanced plant, but I found it to be very easy to grow, and I've grown it under low lighting without CO2 injection in both hard and soft water tanks. Pearlweed has a very fast growth rate, letting it consume a lot of toxic nitrogen compounds from the water and provide ample surface area for your shrimp to graze on biofilm and algae. As the pearlweed grows closer to the light, more biofilm seems to grow on the plant, allowing your shrimp to feed on it even more. The only downside of this type of shrimp tank is that it turns into a dense jungle and makes it difficult to spot your shrimp. Next up is liverwort, and this one is Monoselenium tenerum, but there's other varieties out there like Pellia. I know that this looks like Suswasatang, but it's actually a different plant, but Suswasatang is relatively interchangeable with this. I decided to try liverwort as an alternative to moss, providing grazing space for my shrimp to feed on the biofilm that grows on it. It did take a lot of time for the plant to adapt to my tank and actually start to grow, but now that it's been grown for a couple of months, the shrimp do go on it from time to time to graze on the biofilm grown on it. It's in my orange neocaridina shrimp tank, and this colony is still very small, so there's not really enough of them to get a realistic idea if it is a better alternative to moss, but it definitely works in shrimp tanks. I'm growing this in one of the most low powered lights I've seen on the market. It's just a cheap Ciora light and it's grown fine, but I have only tried it in hard water tanks, so I'm not sure about using it with soft water caridina species. It does seem to be becoming more popular in the hobby as well, making it easier to find in shops, and it's usually around the same price as moss. Next up is Eliocharis, also known as dwarf hairgrass. I used to keep this in my old Wallstad betta fish tank, and the shrimp in there seem to absolutely love it, and they basically treat the Eliocharis like a moss alternative. This inspired me to try a dedicated shrimp tank with different types of Eliocharis in it, but unfortunately it didn't really work out as well as I hoped. I'm not sure if the problem is nutrients levels or lighting levels or something like that, but it just really hasn't grown to the level it should have. I've also recently added some to my new shrimp jar as well, with it acting as a carpet in the foreground, and hopefully the shrimp will get to graze on the algae and biofilm that grow on it in the future. So yeah, if you are looking for a relatively easy to find and cheap foreground plant that will also work well as a grazing area for your shrimp, then Eliocharis could be the plant for you. Next up are stem plants with varieties like Limnophila, Rotala, Ludwigia and Hygrophila being ideal for shrimp tanks. I know that I mentioned pearlweed earlier in the video, which is also a type of stem plant, but these ones do behave differently. Instead of spreading out in all directions like pearlweed and taking over, the majority of these stem plants just grow vertically, making them far easier to manage. You can use these stem plants in a standard aquascape setup or in a tank like this Wallstad cherry shrimp tank for natural water purification. This particular tank setup uses Rotala rotundifolia to naturally purify the water and keep the shrimp safe. Thankfully, most stem plants in the hobby are cheap and easy to find, and they're very easy to propagate because you trim the excess plant from the top and then just replant it into your substrate, making it a very budget friendly option. Next up are lily plants, which have become quite popular in the hobby recently. This particular one is one of the lotus species, but I'm not 100% on the exact variety that it is, and it did take a couple of months to establish itself, but since then it's really taken off with its growth rate. Now the benefit of this plant in a shrimp tank does seem to depend on the actual growth stage of its leaves. My shrimp seem to love grazing on the algae and biofilm that form on the newer leaves as they start to reach the surface and get close to the light source. Still, I often see my shrimp on the underside of the leaves grazing on whatever's grown on there. It just reminds me of what I constantly see with my pearlweed, where the closer the plant is to the light source, the more algae and biofilm tends to grow on it and the shrimp tend to gather there. The different types of lily plants also have quite unique leaves compared to what a lot of other people keep in aquariums, so they do stand out. Now these are becoming easier to find in shops, but they can usually be at a higher price tag than a lot of other aquarium plants in the hobby. If I'm totally honest, it's probably not a plant that I would add to a shrimp only tank, but in a heavily planted community setup like this one, I do think it is a good plant to keep. As you can see, my shrimp take full advantage of the grazing space on it, but it also adds a unique colour and leaf shape to the rest of the plants in there. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Hopefully you've found it helpful. There's plenty of plants in the hobby that will work well in your shrimp tank, and these ones should be a great starting point. Thanks for watching and have a good day.